tune is The Shroud. Fortunately, I look more like the lead singer than the guy with the long hair playing the guitar. But, oh well, that's genetics for you. Thank my dad. All right, good to see you all. Okay, before we get into things, what I handed, I'll start with the first thing first. What I handed out to you is a change to the syllabus. It's really nothing major, but as I say in the syllabus, I'll send you an email, I'll post an announcement, and I'm required, I should give you a printed copy of the change. So I'm doing all three. All right. It's nothing major, as I said. It's just, I noticed when I was doing quiz 5, I'm like, I got to release the answers to them before exam week. They need the answers to study from before that. So I didn't notice that before when I was writing the syllabus. So I just had to make that change to note that for quiz 5, the answers will be released more quickly than before, so that you have them for the test. Okay, if you've been looking at your emails, I sent out a flurry. I was busy yesterday, sending out emails and doing things. There are a number of extra credits that you can do. There are 2 quizzes. One covers Black History Month. Another extra credit quiz, covers Women's History Month. Bunch of questions that I didn't ask you on the other quizzes. And then there's a paper, because I didn't know what to call it. It's an assignment. That's all it is. It's not really a paper. It's not, it's just it's a text entry that, just like you did, no, you didn't do that. Excuse me. It's a text entry thing on Canvas. You go in and you answer questions. I want to, for my own evaluation, know, what points I hit that you liked in the class, what things points I did not do well on in the class, what assignments you liked, whatever. Just let me know. What did you like about the course? What didn't you? And you'll get a point for it. You don't have to, you can write as much as you want or as little as you want. But if you do it, you'll get a point. So look, there are extra credits available since people asked. And I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, well, of course, Christ is risen. So the message of the church, as always, is Christ is risen from the dead. I don't know if do they sing this in the Coptic church during the liturgy for Easter Sunday? Christ is risen. They do in the Byzantine churches. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling death by death, and to those in the tombs granting life. Yes, the resurrection, which is for all of us. Jesus isn't unique in the resurrection. It's a promise for all of us when we fall asleep in Christ, as someone did just the other day. Some notable person fell asleep in the Lord. And who might that be? Miss Barris. Yes, okay. Pope Francis. Thank God. At least someone didn't say like Ronald McDonald or something, Yes, so I say a little prayer for Pope Francis that he may rest in peace and be with Christ as well. And also pray for the Catholic Church as they decide and elect a new Bishop of Rome, whoever that might be. I'm always curious to see what name they're going to take. They take like a cool name or something like that. We need another Pope Sylvester. Or a Pope Linus. Haven't had a Pope Linus in a long time. Anyways. Okay, but getting back to the important one, who is not the Pope, God. Let's finish up on God. Okay, what are we doing here? I think I ended with the incarnation, your definition of the incarnation. Because then the question is, okay, we've got God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, I talked about what differentiates them is their relationships. Okay, but the Jewish God likes to throw curveballs. Who knew he was a baseball player? Anyways, he likes to throw curveballs, and he throws us one. Because, wait, Dr. Dunn, didn't you say, or don't Christians say that Jesus was a man too? But I thought God was, he was, unchangeable. I thought he had no beginning in time. The Son had no beginning in time. But now you're telling me at a certain date, like around 6 BC, all of a sudden God is now a man. He's human. Yes, this is the belief called the incarnation, that the Son, also known as the Word, took on flesh. Carnis in Latin means meat or flesh. Chili con carne, yes. Chili with meat. Oh, very nice. Oh, I'm already thinking about it now because I miswrote it. Not carnis. Carnis, from Latin carnis, which means flesh. So another way you could translate this more literally into English, if you want the more Germanic English, the enfleshment. This is based on the Latin, but enfleshment means exactly the same thing. It's just from our German roots in English. You see, we can do that. English for me is like a beautiful language. We have, Latin-based words, and Germanic still are Germanic-based words. So the enfleshment of the Word, the enfleshment of God the Son. What does this mean? You'll see your definition there. It's the belief that God the Son took on a full and complete human nature. Okay, that's important to know. At his conception in the womb of his mother Mary. So when he was conceived, not when he was born. So December 25th is not the time of the incarnation. Actually, the incarnation is celebrated in March, typically by, I think, the Roman Catholic and also the Eastern Orthodox churches, at the Feast of the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel announces to Mary that she will be, or asks her if she will be, the mother of Christ, of the Son of God. And she says yes. And once he's then conceived, or believed to be conceived at that moment, that's the incarnation. Okay? His birthday is another thing. All right? Because, of course, we know that biologically. Babies are there, right? I think. At least that's what pregnant women tell me, like the kids moving around and kicking and doing all sorts of stuff. And even apparently listening, we can hear things. So apparently something's there before the birth. So the incarnation happened 9 months before Jesus' birth. He became flesh. So we need to remember our distinctions of person and nature. Who becomes enfleshed? The Son, not the divine nature. Okay? The Son becomes enfleshed. So we're talking here about personality. Again and again, that's just a word. Maybe not even the best word, but it's traditional, and no one can seem to think of any better word to describe it. But however way you want to understand this idea of personality or person within the Godhead, that's fine, as long as it's Orthodox. Not Orthodox Mizkab, I'll have to report you to the back. Send the Jesuits to get you and put you in prison. No. We don't burn heretics anymore, as we have. We won't do it. We're tired. No, I'm kidding. Don't burn heretics. Anyways, person. All right? God the Son as a person takes on a human nature, not a human personality. So sometimes, you got to be careful with your language here. Sometimes even, theologians will say, like, Jesus is a human being or something like that. Okay, it depends on what you mean by that. If you mean that he has a human nature, yes, okay. But you want to be careful that you're not saying that he is a human person. He's not. He is a divine person, the Son, who took on a full human nature and all that entails. Okay? So he's kind of, that's the wrong kind of word, a coming together, one might say, of the divine and human natures. Full divine and complete divine and human natures. God the Son did not lose anything of his divinity by taking on flesh. even though we know from the Christ hymn, in the words of the Christ hymn in Philippians, 2nd Philippians, Christians talked about that. He became a slave. He lowered himself. All right. He became, in a sense, less. All right. When I asked the question, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that he stopped being God a little bit? He lessened himself? No, it doesn't. The church, when they thought about it later, like 300 or 400 years later, said, no, the divine nature is not lessened. There's a difference going on. And the human nature is not lessened either. The human nature is taken up 100% in its completeness. So the human nature is not absorbed into the divinity or something, or loses something of its humanity. So it's not a man being made a god. All right. Which would be paganism. And the pagans surrounding the Jews and the Christians in Greece and Rome, and also in other cultures, India and places like that, they had many stories of divine men who were so great, so holy, so wise that they were considered to be gods. They were changed into gods. Yeah, there's nothing unique about that. But that's not what the Christians were saying about Jesus. Because he was unique. He was different. Because he wasn't a man who becomes God. He's God who becomes fully man. Because in any human religion, you don't really, this was, again, the uniqueness. If we study world religions, it's kind of like the special sauce of Christianity, because other religions have gods appearing in what appear to be human form, but they're always appearances. They're not real. They're always kind of illusory. All right? Like Hinduism. If you take world religions with me, you'll know that the god Vishnu makes several appearances on earth amongst men and women. But they're appearances. They're not incarnations. He doesn't truly become human. And this is kind of obvious in some of the forms he takes. Sometimes he looks like a human person, but other times he's like half man, half fish, half man, half lion. So it's kind of obvious, Miss Cobb, that something's weird here. This is an unusual person, and he's recognizable, and everyone recognizes him as the god. Everyone recognizes him as Vishnu. They recognize that he's a god, even though he's appearing as something. But remember your reading of Mark. People don't recognize Jesus as God. He's very human. And then he's God. He acts like God in some ways. And that completely blows the Jewish mind. They just don't know what to make of it. They don't understand it. Okay, so this is how we should kind of try to properly understand this coming together. Okay, it's a divine person with his divine nature taking on a human nature, but not human personhood. Okay, you're not creating another person. So there are not, once Jesus is incarnate in the womb of his mother, it's not like, poof, you now have another person created like Jesus Christ, with the name Jesus Christ, who is now this combination of divinity and humanity. No. Because then you have two principles of rational action, which is illogical. It's like two principles of rational action. Now you have a distinction, maybe even a separation in God the Son. And God is undivided. Even in his personhood, the relationships are distinct. They're not divided from each other. They're not three separate gods based on their relations. They're distinctions between them. But they are real distinctions. What else did I want to say? Okay, did I say this? Yes, I said that. Now, the God part, people don't seem to have a problem with. I think it's more the fully human part. Because even within Christianity, because Christianity, if you look at the history and devotion to Jesus, a lot of the time Christianity kind of errs on the side of the divinity and sometimes can forget the humanity, forget about that. Almost like I said, the humanity is just absorbed up into the divinity, because of course Jesus is God. Well, ultimately, yes, he's God the Son, who's there, not somebody else. But we need to remember and emphasize the humanity. Jesus is fully human. It's not the God stuff that puzzles people. If Jesus could forgive sins or Jesus could walk on water, people know those stories and they're like, okay, we've heard this stuff before, in other mythologies and stuff. So no one ever seems to be that impressed by that. But what puzzles or troubles people is when it's like, yeah, but if Jesus is God, see, there's the question, right, Mr. Urban? No one starts out saying, yeah, but if Jesus were human, usually, if Jesus were God, then how could this happen to him? How could he feel emotions? How could he die? How could he not know things? Okay? How could he be sad? How could he be scared? How could he despair and seem to lose hope? That's the humanity that people have trouble with, I think. But we have to remember that Jesus was fully human. He was not a half human or only in appearance. He was human in his psychology. He had a human soul like we do. He had human knowledge, which was like ours. It was limited because he had a brain like I do, which is limited. So he didn't know everything. He had to learn stuff, learn how to speak a language. When he's a baby, he starts learning language and learns how to be a woodworker. It's not like Jesus just all of a sudden was like, picking up the tools and being like, hey, or even that. I mean, why was Jesus a woodworker? I mean, if Jesus is God the Son, why didn't he start out like writing computer code, Ms. Cohen? Why isn't Jesus like building rocket ships? Hey, I'll tell you how to cure disease. We have to make a vaccine. I'll show you how. I'm Jesus, fully God. I know. No, he doesn't know. His humanity is still limited in certain ways. Now, I think he knew he was God. He had, in the spiritual realm, he had that vision of God. He understood himself, because I never see, at least, and if you read all four Gospels, I never see a Jesus who doubts himself. He always knows who he is and what he's about, even though the Gospels are very, very different in a lot of ways. Jesus is never in doubt about his mission, or at least who his Father is. Let's put it that way. If Jesus is not completely aware Godhood in that sense, he knows he's from God, certainly, because God's his Father. So Jesus had those things, but he had spiritual aspects of his humanity, a soul and a rational intellect and emotions and a psychology, but he also had a physical body with physical needs. Jesus needed to eat, he slept, he needed to sleep, his body grew, his body could feel pain receptors in his body could feel pain, and his body could stop working. It could die, what we call dying. Now, how can this be? So, okay, fine. Now, maybe you understand what I'm talking about, makes sense, but, how can it be? I don't know. Don't ask those questions, Ms. Westergom. Mr. Wilmer, it's a mystery. No, truly, it is a mystery. I don't know. It can't, and really, if I were honest, and I'll be honest with you, it cannot be. It really can't. Since God is true, God is spiritual, he's not matter, he's not material according to the Christian conception and Jewish conception of God. He also can't change, so he can't grow and be something different. He's beyond time and, how do I say that? He can't die. God doesn't die. He doesn't have an end. He doesn't stop working. He doesn't have a body to break down and fall apart. So it's what they call a paradox. A paradox. Which, Ms. Free J, is where you put boats. As put it, boat. No, a paradox. Do I give this on the PowerPoint? I don't know if I give this. No, I don't. What is a paradox? I'll define it for you. It's the name for an apparent contradiction to logic or common sense. Something that apparently contradicts logic, rational thought, or just common sense, which is also kind of rational thought. So a paradox is kind of like just another term for a contradiction. It's a contradiction, which shouldn't happen or couldn't or shouldn't happen in order for it to make sense. And as you know, Mr. Wilmer, I'm leading you down the path, right? I've already got my response going, Mr. Cruz. And so people have a problem with that. Like you can't have both. You know, how you got one can't really have the other. There are questions about both. But you can have one with the other, even in the physical world, even in science. Go back to science because everyone's big on the science. Even in science, in the material world that we study and observe, there are paradoxes. There are apparent contradictions all over the place. I'll give you my basic example, but there are other examples. Is light. So we have lights in the room. Light is bouncing off of your body into my eyes. So I see the light reflected off of you. Okay? And we see hopefully the light reflected off of me, Mr. Bellamy. God bless you, sir. A lot of light, Mr. Bellamy. Fortunately. Hopefully there'll be less to keep exercising. But you see the light, right? But Ms. Plunkett, what is light? What is light? Do you think it's a wave? Does it move? Light energy move through your eyes like a wave? Or do you what do you think it is? A particle, maybe? Just a straight line of particles? Why do you think it's like a wave? What makes you think? You don't know, but you think it. Okay, that's fine. Well, I don't know. Maybe you learned it, in high school or another class here at college, university, to the physics course. Does anyone know? Has anyone studied light? No? Okay. It's the beginning of knowledge, Ms. Hatton. No, I mean, unless the glass can't be filled, unless it's kind of empty, right? You have to admit, well, it needs to be filled. You can fill it, and it's got something. That was a question. I mean, a lot of physicists and people before like in the 1800s or 1900s agreed with you, Ms. Plunkett, that light was a wave. Does it matter? I don't know. I'm not a physicist, but apparently this is a big debate amongst physicists about what kind of energy light is. And most of them were, some people were saying it's a wave. Okay, it goes up and down like this. It's wavy. The beam of light is wavy. All right? Because they couldn't, according to their mind and their theories of physics, they couldn't figure out how it could be any other way in order for light to work, for it to move through space and stuff like that. But there are others that said it was really a punctiliar type thing. It was like photons, those particles going in a straight line, like a straight line of particles or photons. And that made sense to them. So you had this debate, and it was really, I'm sure you've heard of this guy, Albert Einstein. Forget when it was. It might have been the 1920s. I think it was early. I think it was the 1920s or something. He wrote a paper in a scientific journal where he demonstrated that actually light is both. It's both a wave and it's a particle. It's both at the same time. Both at the same time. And he showed how this could be. But that was a contradiction. That was a paradox. Because even though Einstein could show it, couldn't explain it. Why was light like this? It should be one or the other. It should be a wave or it should be a particle. But Einstein is showing that it's both. It's reasonable to say that it's both, just the way the light acts, the way its nature. So it is a paradox. You can't explain it. It's just the way light is. We don't know why. That's my main example, but there are other paradoxes that we have all throughout physics. I mean, like event horizons for black holes. Once they discovered black holes, eventually discovered black holes, which was only like a decade ago that they were able to actually take a picture, confirm the presence of a black hole, but they kind of knew they were there. The event horizon, once you get closer to the, I guess, the hole of the black hole, this rupture, this rip in space-time, which goes, who knows where. But anyways, get to the horizon on the plane of the universe, physics completely changes. It does all sorts of different things that it's not supposed to do, according to the laws that we know. And we call them laws. They're supposed to be unbreakable, but they are breakable. So how can they be laws? It's a paradox. But we've observed it. Physicists have observed these things. I mean, they can't deny them. They can't explain the paradox of the event horizon of a black hole, what's going on there. They just know it's happening. It happens. So these things happen. So I'm not surprised when a paradox appears in my religious faith. But I just have to say, I know the experience. The followers of Jesus passed on the tradition, sacred tradition, that Jesus was both God and man. He acted like a God, but he also was fully a man. They didn't try to explain it. They don't explain it in the Gospels. The church has never tried to explain it. It just says this is what is part of our belief. It has to be believed. Okay. Now I think I'm done with it. Yay. Oh, I'm cooking today, Mr. Urban. The saints and the Blessed Virgin Mary. But Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints. But it's real. I really could just call this lecture the saints. Does it feel like they have the air conditioning on? No, it doesn't. I'm starting to sweat like a pig. Oh well. You should know when it's hot out. Put the air conditioning on. Anyways, the saints. Again. Okay, move on, Dr. Dunn. The word saint is Latin-based in English. We could say, again, I could go Germanic and say the holy ones, the holy, which is, the same thing, just Germanic. But we'll stay with saints. From the Latin word sanctus, which means to be holy, be dedicated to a god, basically is what the word means. Anything that's dedicated to a god or a spirit is considered sanctus. It's considered holy. So, I mean, really, if you wanted to define holiness, which I give you there on the PowerPoint, you could say holiness is really anything that's kind of set apart for a god. So it's kind of taboo. Usually holy things, you have to be very careful what you do with them, how you touch them. Because since they're dedicated, they're the God's property, not yours. And by disrespecting the holy thing or holy person, you're disrespecting the God in religions when they talk about the sacred or the holy. But I'm giving you a more kind of generalized definition. Holiness, because this is how people usually mean holy. They usually don't understand it in a religious study sense of something that's taboo or set apart or whatever. But a state of goodness or righteousness, doing the right thing, doing what's supposed to be done, what should be done, what's owed in justice to yourself, but also to in your relations with other human beings and in your relationship with a God, if you believe in one, or a spirit. Holiness, goodness, righteousness. And so someone who is recognized as a person who is holy and righteous has tried to order his or her whole life according to acting well or good or acting righteously. It's called a saint. Holy person as seen as a model. of, how should I relate to God and other human beings? Well, this person's the example for that, an exemplar, a saint. So a saint is holy, which is really saying the same thing. A saint is a saint. Which is kind of a tautology, Ms. Crystal, right? If anyone's taken philosophy, maybe stumbled across the word tautology, where you're saying exactly that the subject and predicate say exactly the same thing, basically. What do I want to say about that? Well, because I have other notes here. I'll get to that in a second. So for Christianity, a holy person or a saint is someone who is living or has lived, okay, is currently living or did live, wink, wink, meaning they're no longer with us, they're dead, in imitation of Jesus Christ and in conformity with the good news, with the gospel, the message about him. So someone trying to conform his or her life, be an example of how to live the teachings of Jesus. Have Jesus as the example for Christianity. So to put it simply, you're trying to live in accordance with God's will. As a Christian, God's will is mediated to you through Jesus Christ. To put it even more simply, very simply, a saint is God's friend, Mr. Lattimore. Anyone who, can you say, are you God's friend? Is God your friend? God, of course, is everybody's friend. Tries to be. Though he's a little bit of a pushy friend sometimes. It's always calling up, What are you doing? You going to go to church this Sunday? Nah, I don't know. I don't know, Lord. We'll see what happens. I got things to do. But I miss you. All right, Yahweh. Very needy God. But anyways, are you God's friend? That's probably the baseline for sainthood, to be a friend of God. Are you on God's side? At least you're beginning the journey to sainthood. You might know from the world that we live in that there are people who are not on God's side. You can find people like that even in religion, even in a church. Because usually religion is where you can do the most damage to people. You can really hurt people in religion, not just psychologically, but spiritually. Yeah. Some people like that, especially if you're evil. You want to go where you can do the most damage, right? So I'm not surprised when I find evil people of religion. Hopefully I'm not one. I don't think I am, Ms. Plunkett. I hope I'm not. Anyways, are people called, okay, saint, when am I going to get to this? All right, I'll address this question first, then I'll go to my note there. It's bugging me. All right. Is this scriptural? Okay, because, people want to know, well, but is it in the Bible or stuff like that? You Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, you have all your saints and statues and pictures of holy people and stuff like that. People you honor and venerate and stuff like that. But it really should all be about Jesus, right? He's the Holy One. He's the one we should venerate. We don't need all these other saints to put in front of him or next to him or whatever. Let's look at the Bible. Are people called saints? Even people who are dead called saints. I'll just give you one example. Well, I give you an example on the PowerPoint. Yes. Okay. If you want an example from the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, because even the New Testament is written by Jews, go to Psalm 106, verse 16, and Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses, who was the first high priest of the Jews, selected by God, who was long dead when Psalm 106 was written, by whom we don't necessarily know. We know it was written a long time later, hundreds of years later. He's dead, but he's called a holy one. He's called a saint. He's called a holy one, kadosh. He's said to be kadosh, holy, righteous. So people were recognized as saints. But if you were listening, they don't read Matthew's passion narrative At least in the Roman Catholic Church, they opt for John's passion narrative on Easter. But if you read Matthew's passion narrative in chapter 28, chapter 27, well, some of you have computers, so I know you have it on your computer, and God bless her. She had her Bible out from like the first moment she came in the room. Thank you, Ms. Westergom. And if you had it out on your computer, God bless you too. But other people are like, Who would like to read this? Chapter 27 in Matthew's Gospel. We want to start reading. Let's start reading with verse 45. Verse 45 of chapter 27. Would like to read that for us? I got you, Miss Plunkett. Let's see. I know you've done it before. Let's see if somebody else wants to do it. Someone who doesn't do it a lot. Just to bump up that class participation grade, yeah? Oh, wait. Ms. Barris, go ahead. Chapter 27, verse 45.
About 3 afternoon, Jesus cried out, Eli, John.
Send it out. Good. Very good.
My God, my God. When someone who was standing there heard this, they said, He's calling Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge and filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, Now leave him alone and see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up the spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom, and shook, the rock split, and the tombs broke loose. The bodies of many people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went to the holy city and appeared to many people. And the certain and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all of them happened. They were terrified and exclaimed, Surely he was the Son of God.
Okay, that's fine. We can stop there. Good. Okay, so this is the account in Matthew's Gospel of Jesus' death on the cross. Probably copied from Mark, but Matthew also has some of his own traditions that he incorporates based on the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus is hanging on the cross, and in his last moments, he cries out in a loud voice. So he screams from the cross, Eli, 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 or Eloi, I think it is in Mark's Gospel, lema sabachthani, which is Aramaic, which does mean, translates for those who might not know Aramaic, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or why have you forgotten me? Okay? So they preserve the last words of Jesus. They don't change them. They translate them for you, but then Mark keeps them. Luke doesn't keep them. He's had Jesus say something else. And John doesn't keep them as well, but it shows you maybe the antiquity of the tradition of the story, that they keep apparently the original words of Jesus' last moments. And he's really, speaking Aramaic, but he's seems to be quoting from a psalm, one of the psalms. If you look in the cross references, so I like this. Yeah, Psalm 22. Apparently is a psalm written by King David, which opens up with, my God, why have you forsaken me? Apparently David was going through a difficult time in his life. He didn't feel like God was present in his life. What have I felt like that? Many times. Okay? God, basically the psalm is saying, God, where are you? but if you read the whole psalm, it ends with a sign of hope that I still know you're there. Oh God, where are you? You know, are you going to intervene? Aren't you going to do something? Okay. So anyway, so Jesus makes this cry and then he dies. And when he dies, Matthew adds this little bit of information, which is not in Mark or Luke or John. It's from our source M, as we know, from the Synoptic probably is, Matthew's special material. The veil of the temple sanctuary was torn apart. There's a big cloth in front of the main part of the temple where God was believed to be present and to actually live. They had a huge cloth or veil over the door, so you couldn't even see it. But this is torn apart, apparently, for whatever reason. I'm not, you can debate what the symbolism of that is. And there's an earthquake, and rocks are split open, and tombs are open. There's a great earthquake. Matthew's kind of being like really dramatic here. I don't know if there was really an earthquake at the time Jesus died. I think it's more dramatic. But the tombs were open, and the bodies of many saints, or holy ones, same thing, same death. The bodies of many saints. So dead holy people who were dead, came out of the tombs after his resurrection. Well, that's interesting, Ms. Plunkett, or Ms. Patton, because he just died, right? He hasn't risen. I mean, the resurrection is in chapter 20. But Matthew's like, he's telling us stuff. Okay, he told us stuff before. He's telling us stuff that hasn't happened yet, but all that he knows about. Okay, so there's a little bit of a little bit of a, what you would call it? What do they call it in movies? So there's a time mistake. When like in a movie, if you look at something, guy's wearing a tie in one scene, and then he's not. A continuity error. You watch the movie and someone's wearing a hat, and then the next scene they're not wearing a hat. So a little continuity error here. But anyways, the bodies come out after the resurrection. They entered the holy city of Jerusalem and appeared to people. Okay, so I had this discussion one time with a Protestant person online, and they were asking, how can denying that you can call people human beings saints and this whole idea of sainthood? And I just quoted this scripture from him, and I didn't hear anything else from him. Crickets after that, because it seemed pretty obvious to me. These dead people are saints. They're holy people. They were holy people when they were alive. They died. They were buried. But they were still holy people, and they come out and they appear to people in the city of Jerusalem. So it's recognized even in Judaism that there is sainthood. There are people who are seen to be maybe above and beyond, kind of like they're in the Hall of Fame, you might say, in the religious sense. They're exemplars of a relationship with God that I might try to be like. Even if they're dead, their sainthood, their holiness doesn't end with their death. They're still holy. Sainthood is for everybody. And I talked about Vatican II before, at the Second Vatican Council. Not that the church didn't teach this previously in the first 1900 years of the Catholic Church, but it wasn't stressed enough. Usually people thought that real holiness was kind of reserved to the clergy, or to monks and nuns, people who really dedicated their whole life, to God in that way. Which is true. I mean, there are people who do that. They pursue God as their job, in a manner of speaking. And yeah, that Ms. Plunkett can lead to holiness. But Mr. Mexcatitla don't always. Just read the history of the church. Who is usually causing troubles and problems in the history of the church? The clergy, monks, popes, not so much nuns, but it was usually the monks and like our friend Arius was a priest. Yeah. Martin Luther, the Protestant Reformation, priest. Oh, yes. Anyways. So at Vatican II, in a document called Lumen Gentium, the Dogmatic Constitution on the Church is its official title, the Dogmatic Constitution. Since it's a dogmatic constitution, we know it at the highest level of authority. It's called Lumen Gentium from its first two Latin words, the light of the nations. Christ is the light of the nations on the church. And in that document, I'm not going to give you the exact reference because it's not necessary. If you want to know, you can ask me after class. But in that document, they have a whole section where they affirm that there's a universal call to sainthood for all Christians. They felt the bishops felt that it needed to be said that no, it's not just someone who closes himself up in a monastery or a convent, or someone who prays all the time. That's just for a person who wears, kind of weird dress, like the religious don't really do that anymore, but I wish they would. It's just cool. Religion should be fun. But in the old days, you'd see them dressed up like Friar Tuck and stuff like that, wearing their habits, brown or black or whatever, white. It's not just for the clergy, someone wearing a collar around his neck or a veil on her head. It's universal. All Christians are called to be good and righteous people, fully good and righteous people. They can't be indifferent about holiness. And in fact, the bishops emphasized that so much. They said that those who don't persevere in love or holiness, the pursuit of holiness, can't be saved. Christians who do not try to be holy cannot be saved. They will not go to heaven. They will go to hell. Probably. They don't really know. I mean, God knows. God knows the person's heart. And God is a merciful judge, I believe. So yeah, a person who's trying is fine. If you're not trying, well, then that's an issue. But all Christians should be trying for holiness. That was their message in Lumen Gentium. Okay. What does sacred tradition tell us about sainthood? What I'm talking about here is called, it's not on this PowerPoint, maybe it's on the next one, the communion of saints. I think you're talking of continuity errors with Varus. I should have put it further. But anyways, I'm talking about what's called the communion of saints, the unity, the coming together of those called to be holy, which again, according to Lumen Gentium at Vatican II, means everybody. I mean, the Pope, when there is another Pope, but when he was alive, the Bishop of Rome is called to holiness just as much as some little kid or a baby that's just been baptized. Okay? However, I mean, the call to holiness might be more serious for certain people based on their obligations. I would expect, and this is not just my opinion, but this is also part of theology, that someone has an obligation, like the Bishop of Rome, a Pope, is more called to be good and righteous than a little baby who's just been baptized, doesn't really know the faith yet, but is in the faith. A parent has more obligation to be good and righteous than maybe the children, who should be learning from the parent, hopefully, learning the faith. That's where you learn the faith from, not from a Catholic school. Catholic schools are worthless in passing on the faith. Have you seen the Catholic population coming through our schools? They don't know anything, a lot of them, at least in my personal experience. Or they lose the faith by the time they get out of a Catholic high school or something. They don't believe anymore. They don't go to church, certainly aren't going to church. I mean, ask how many go to a Catholic high school or how many of you kids are going to Mass every Sunday? Your parents taking you? Does your father go? Because usually the moms go. Moms are diligent, but does dad go? Mm-hmm. So how do you pass on? They're the ones passing the faith. The priest doesn't see their kids every day. The Pope doesn't know who your kids are. So there's an obligation, there's more of an obligation on me as your teacher to be good and righteous, because I'm kind of an example to you. If I'm teaching you all these things about Jesus, saying I believe them, and then you see me going out to, I don't know, some girly bar after, yeah. Well, you never know. I could be trying to save souls, Mr. Wolf, passing out holy cards of St. Mary of Egypt. Well, you got to go where the sick are, right, Mr. Urban? You got to, but nevertheless, if you know I'm doing bad things, it's like I have no moral credibility with you. I have an obligation. I will be judged more harshly on my knowledge of the faith and what I claimed about myself than someone who just didn't know and is living his or her life as best they could. But between all the baptized Christians, there is a spiritual union, as it says, a union of spirit that exists between all members of the church. And that doesn't mean living members. It certainly means living members, those who are alive now, like those of us, yes, Christians, Catholics, those who are related to the Catholic Church in various ways. But it includes those who have died as well. When a person dies, they don't cease being a Christian, and they don't cease being part of the church. They don't disappear. They're alive. They're spiritually still alive. You think they have a soul, right? The soul doesn't it's not in limbo. It's not in stasis. You hope it's with God. So even death does not break that bond of communion amongst those who belong to Christ. It's a change, yes. The soul is separated from its physical form, but death doesn't destroy the soul, so it doesn't exist anymore. And we see this in the scriptures. In the letter to the Philippians, chapter 1, verse 21, Paul says to the Philippian Christians, he's talking about other things, but in the context of what he's talking about, he says, to live is Christ. My life as a Christian is to be like Christ. But then he adds, to die as a Christian is gain. It's a gain. I'm getting more life by dying, because now I'm not seeing Jesus or experiencing Jesus through the veil of my human flesh, where I can't really see the spiritual realm. I can experience it maybe in my soul. But once I'm dead, I'm in the presence of Christ spiritually. So I'm more alive in a way than I was just being in a human body. And when Jesus argues, there's a question about the resurrection. This is Mark chapter 12. I'm not going to go into it, but Jesus has an argument with the priests, the Sadducees. Yeah, I know, Ms. Abdul Malak. Sorry. I wish I could turn on the air conditioner. There's a question about the resurrection. Remember, I told you that the idea of the resurrection was a late development. Not all Jews believed in a resurrection from the dead. Not the priests in the temple, most of them, called the Sadducees. They were very conservative. This was a late development. They just believed, there was an underworld that you went to called Sheol, but it wasn't a heaven. It wasn't a hell either. It was just, you just kind of ceased existing in a way. You went to this kind of murky existence where you weren't in pain, but you weren't happy either. And you weren't really in the presence of God in a certain way. It was a very primitive view of an afterlife. But it was the view that it was traditional, so the Sadducees accepted that. There was no view of a resurrection. That was a late view, so they didn't accept that. So they questioned Jesus about it. They tried to challenge him, and they give him this story, this little paradox. Jesus, there's a woman. Now, actually, let me begin where I should be. Jesus, in the law of Moses, the law tells us that if a man dies before he has any children, that his brother, his nearest relative, is supposed to marry his wife and raise up children to his brother. Okay? Give kids so, kind of his brother will continue. Yeah, I know biologically it doesn't work, but, God's not a biologist. He's a lawgiver, okay? This is just what he wants them to do. And yeah, I know there are questions of incest, but again, he's God. Just do what he wants you to do, all right? So that was a custom amongst the Jewish people, that if a man were married to a woman and he died without having had any kids, then his nearest relative, his brother, should marry her, even if he has a wife, apparently, and have sex with her to raise up children for him. So his name will continue, at least legally, if not biologically. So, but legally. All right? So the Sadducees are like, they bring this law to Jesus. Moses told us to do this, Brother has to marry the guy's wife. Now, Jesus, a guy was married to a woman and he died without any kids. So his brother married the woman, his wife, just like he was supposed to do. But before he could come together with her and have children, he died too. So another brother the next brother had to fill in. So he does. He marries the same woman, the guy's wife, the original guy's wife, and to raise up children. But before he can have sex with her, he dies as well. And this continues on and on and on. There were 7 brothers in total. All of them married the same woman and all died before they could have sexual relations with her and raise up children for the first brother who was her husband, according to the law. My question would be, is this woman a black widow? Is she like some kind of serial killer who's killing the guys in the bed or something, What's going on here? I mean, eventually you have to say, 7 guys all die from the same woman? She's got to be doing something, Miss 3J. Call the law. No? Well, it's a trick. It's to make Jesus look stupid. That's the purpose of the question. So Jesus! So another question, which has nothing to do with the story, actually. Jesus, at the resurrection of the dead, which we don't believe in with the Sadducees, whose wife would she be? What? What does that have to do with the resurrection of the dead? But they're trying to kind of cast an aspersion on the belief in the resurrection of the dead and show from their example how ludicrous, laughable it is to believe in the resurrection of the dead. Because it would, it makes it ridiculous. Now, there's going to be the 7 brothers all married to this one woman. They're all resurrected now. Okay, who's she going to go with now? I would presume the first husband, but she was married to all of them. So they were all, there is no first, second, third in the Jewish mind. Marriage is marriage. Full stop. And Jesus goes off on the priests. Jesus has arguments with the Pharisees, but he does not like the priests. He goes off on them and says, you don't even know the law. You don't know the Bible. You don't know the scriptures. God is not a God of the dead. He's a God of the living. Even the dead are alive with God. They're not dead. They're not gone. They haven't disappeared. They're alive in the presence of God. So he doesn't even deign to answer their question, their silly little question. He basically insults them, says you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know the Bible, and then he follows it up by saying you are greatly misled, which doesn't sound very nasty, but it is. Because they're leaders, but they're misled, but they're not only misled, they're greatly misled. And he's just a little woodworker from some podunk town in Galilee telling them this. Oh, yes, he had no time for them. So God is a God of the living, even if for those who are dead. And we see this belief in Christianity, early Christianity. Christians were not considered dead and gone. They were dead. Death is a reality. Yeah, the soul separates from the body. Okay, the body stops working. The body, the machine, which is not the same as the soul, corrupts and rots and, whatever. As its nature, because it's physical, it's material, it breaks down. But Christians are alive in Christ, and if they are alive, they're alive with God in heaven. If I can talk to a Christian who's alive now, like you, Ms. Crystal, or you, Mr. Lattimore, Miss Fennell, Miss Free J, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I can talk to you now and you can talk to me, when I die, you can still talk to me, can't you? I mean, you go to plenty of Christian churches where they have, the whole part of the service dedicated to, okay, these are members of the community we need to pray for. Jack is sick and Mary's got her mammogram coming up and stuff like that. And we pray for them, we'll pray for these people. Well, who are you praying for? What is, they can't pray for themselves? God doesn't know they have needs. He needs you to tell them, tell God, remind God. And why does it have to be like a group of people? Like if 10 people pray for this person who has cancer, all of his Christian friends prays for him, then maybe now God will cure him. But if it's just the guy praying for himself, I don't want to do that. You're going to still die of cancer. Oh, but wait a second. A whole prayer chain's coming in? Look at all these prayers for Bob! I better cure him, Ms. Wamelsdorf. He's important now. So Christians pray for each other. Why does that stop when they're dead? Why all of a sudden can I not pray for you? Or you can't say, hey, Dr. Dunn, you're up there with God, I believe, could you pray for me to God? Okay, now my prayers are worthless. But when I'm here, if I say to you, hey, I'm praying for you, I hear you going through, oh, thank you, Dr. Dunn. It's approved. It's fine. But all of a sudden I'm dead and my prayers are dirt. Never understood that in some Christian groups. And we don't see this understanding in Christianity, even from the beginning. When Christians buried their dead, they asked for their prayers. We have Christian cemeteries, the catacombs or underground cemeteries. That's usually where everyone buried their dead, underground. But for example, around the city of Rome, they've excavated all these cemeteries, both pagan cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries, but Christian cemeteries are what we're interested in, to see how the Christians were burying their dead. And they would bury their dead, and they would scratch prayers into the plaster, graffiti all over the place for the people who are buried there. And they would ask not just the people to pray for them, but other holy people, like the apostles Peter and Paul. Paul and Peter pray for Victor, whoever Victor was. We don't know who Victor was, but Saints Peter and Paul pray for Victor, who's died. Well, Paul and Peter were dead too by this time, because like the catacombs of St. Sebastian, they date from like maybe the 200s or something. So you're asking dead people to pray for dead people, Anyway, Pope St. Sixtus, remembering your prayers, Aurelius Repentinus. This is really early, the 100s AD. What's the matter, dude? What's the matter, Mr. Cruz? Did I say something that I shouldn't have said? Oh, Mr. Lattimore, you stirring the pot? Oh, yeah, Mr. Cruz, Victor Cruz. I could ask you if you played for the Giants, Mr. Cruz, but anyways. So we see this practice of Christians not just praying for their dead, still praying for Christians who were dead, that they would be fully with God, which leads us to other beliefs like purgatory and stuff like that, but I'm not going to talk about that now. But asking the dead to pray for them as well, or remember them, asking people who had died, especially major figures like the apostles or other major holy figures, to pray for them and for their dead. The two main groups, I'm almost there, right? Yeah, I got one more, 2 more. I'll end with this. But the two main groups, because I'm not going to get into all of this stuff, but the two main groups in the early church who were especially venerated were, as you might imagine, number one, the apostles, the 12, including Paul, and the martyrs, those who were killed in the early centuries for their belief in Christ. That's who we see etched, etched into these walls, prayers being offered to, Saint so-and-so who died, who was a martyr, like Pope Saint Sixtus. The reason they were asking Saint Sixtus's prayers because he had been killed for his faith. The Romans were killing all the leaders of the Roman Church, and he got in the way. Peter and Paul, apostles. So Sixtus was a martyr, Peter and Paul are apostles. And this leads into another belief, which I also won't get into deeply, but drawing pictures, holy pictures, and honoring pictures of Jesus, Mary, and saints. Because already, it's from the pre-400s. Yes, there are plenty of pictures of Jesus and stories from the Gospels, which could just be didactic. They're trying to teach a lesson. But not, But then you start seeing Christians fully honoring the apostles and other people, holy people, with their own pictures. And just their own pictures. There's nothing didactic or teaching about this. It's just the traditional presentation of this saint. So this is the traditional presentation of Saint Peter, usually gray hair with short gray hair with a short beard. Paul, bald, brown hair and a long pointy beard. That's how we know who they are. Okay? And this, in fact, these are at least in the case of Paul, is the earliest image we have of traditional image of the man Paul of Tarsus as he's represented. If you really look that way, I don't know. The fact that they represent him always like this, might be true to form, like he always had the long beard. He was bald, okay, maybe. But yeah, these are there next to the graves just to honor these people, so that you look at the picture of Paul, you look at the picture of Peter, and you remember these holy people now. And you can even look at them and say, you're not really praying to the picture, to the paint, or to whatever on the wall, but you say, Paul, pray for me. It kind of reminds you to make that statement, like draws it out of you. Paul, pray for me. St. Peter, pray for Mary, who died, who's buried here. Okay, Mr. Urban, God bless you. I'll see you on Thursday. Have a good day, miss.